The first thing Officer James noticed about the town was how quiet it was. Not peaceful, quiet. Like the kind of quiet that pressed against your ears until you had to say something just to make sure you hadn't gone deaf. Woodpine sat at the base of a mountain range, nestled between tall pines and narrow winding roads. A postcard town. One diner, one gas station, one main street with a row of stores that hadn't changed their signage since the 80s. It smelled like rain-soaked bark and distant firewood. Supposedly crime-free, serene, the kind of place people moved to when they were tired of noise. But James had seen too much to trust towns that advertised themselves as having nothing going on. There's always something going on. His transfer had been sudden. Voluntary, technically. But James knew how to read between the lines. After the mess in his last precinct, a botched drug raid, a captain with a temper, a dead informant, it was either take the out or get buried in internal affairs. Woodpine was the out. Sheriff Holbrook, a thick-set man with a mustache that could have belonged to a Western outlaw, welcomed James with a firm handshake and not much else. "You'll find it slow here," Holbrook had said. "Maybe too slow, depending on what kind of cop you are." James just nodded. He didn't come to chase action. He came to get clear-headed. Heal some things. That was 2 weeks ago. Since then, he'd patrolled empty roads, filled out paperwork on loose dogs, and helped an old woman get a raccoon out of her attic. No crime, no real people problems, just stillness. The locals were polite but kept their distance. They didn't talk much, especially when James asked questions. Like about the missing persons reports that had trickled in over the past 3 years. One every 6 months or so. Officially, they were all voluntary departures or likely accidents. People wandered off into the woods. People moved out without telling anyone. People got tired of being found. But there was a pattern in the files. James felt it, a tension under the surface of the town. Something was off. And then there was Veer. He first saw the dog during his second patrol, lying under the rusted porch of an old station house near the forest's edge. At first glance, Veer looked wild. Long coat, matted in places, muzzle gray with age, eyes like old glass, cloudy, but alert. The townsfolk didn't go near him. Some even crossed the street when they saw him. Not in fear, in reverence. He was canine once. The mechanic had told James. Wiping oil from his hands. "Best damn dog I've ever seen." Used to work with Holbrook himself. Back when this town had a bigger force. Before the changes. "What changes?" James asked. The mechanic didn't answer, just shook his head and went back to the engine. Veer didn't bark, didn't growl, but he watched James. Not like a dog watches a stranger. Like a soldier watches a new recruit. Testing, weighing. Eventually, James started bringing him bits of beef jerky, leaving them by the fence. The dog never came forward while he was there. But the food was always gone the next day. And once, James swore he heard paws behind him as he walked back to his cruiser. Never saw anything. Just a feeling. Then came the rain. It started with thunder in the distance, rolling down the mountains like a warning. Clouds turned the sky to slate. Rain came down hard and sudden, soaking the town in cold sheets. Visibility dropped. Power flickered. James was driving back toward the station when the radio crackled. Sierra 9. Come in. He grabbed the mic. This is Sierra 9. Go ahead. Static. Then, report of a disturbance near the northern trailhead. Screaming heard. Possible injured hiker. James frowned. The northern trailhead led into dense forest. Not a popular route. Too steep. No ranger station for miles. I'm en route, he said. The trailhead was nearly washed out when he got there. Mud coated the road. Trees swayed violently in the wind. James pulled his flashlight and started up the path. 20 minutes in, the storm got worse. Leaves whipped at his face. The beam from the flashlight caught on twisted branches and sudden movement that always turned out to be nothing. Until it wasn't. He heard it, low. Guttural growling. Not a bear. Not a wolf. Something else. Something wrong. Then, out of the underbrush, Veer emerged. Soaked to the bone. Hackles raised. Teeth bared. Not at James. But at the woods behind him. James froze. Easy, boy. Veer ignored him. Instead, the dog growled deeper, took a step forward, then looked back at James like, "Follow me or don't. Your call." Then he ran. James didn't hesitate. He followed. They ran deeper into the woods. Past overturned rocks and shattered branches. Veer moved with purpose, not like a dog chasing prey, but like a soldier moving through enemy terrain. James could barely keep up. Finally, they reached a clearing. The rain let up just enough for him to see it. A torn backpack. Blood. Not much, but fresh. Drag marks leading toward a collapsed old cabin. Barely visible under moss and rot. Veer stood at the edge. Tail low. Body tense. James moved forward slowly, flashlight sweeping across the ruin. "Is someone there?" he called out. Nothing. Then the beam landed on something. A figure. Slumped. Pale. Breathing. But just barely. Young. Late 20s maybe. Soaked and shaking. James rushed over. Checked for wounds. "You're okay. I've got you," he said. The man whispered something. James leaned closer. "What?" "It's still out there," the man croaked. "It's not human." James looked up. Veer was growling again. Low. Controlled. Focused on the tree line. The hairs on James's neck stood up. He turned slowly. Nothing but woods. But the silence was wrong. No wind. No rain. No birds. And then, movement. Fast. Too fast. Veer barked. Loud and furious. Leaping between James and whatever it was. A blur of shadow slammed against a tree and vanished. James didn't wait. He lifted the man, slung him over his shoulder, and ran, Veer flanking him the whole way. Growling the entire time. They didn't stop until they reached the cruiser. James got the man inside. Called in medevac. Backup. The whole works. Veer stayed by the car, watching the woods until long after the paramedics arrived. Later that night, soaked and exhausted, James sat on the steps of the station. Veer was next to him. Silent. "You knew," James said. "You've seen it before." The dog didn't move. just stared into the dark. James reached out, hand hovering near the dog's head. This time, Veer let him. A quiet moment, a pact. They weren't alone in this. And the town wasn't quiet. It was waiting for someone to ask the right questions. Waiting for someone to fight back. And James knew, as lightning flashed across the mountain sky, that this was no transfer. This was a war. And his new partner wasn't just a dog. He was the only one who remembered what they were up against. They reached the clearing just past noon. Rain had left the ground soaked, every step sinking slightly into the mud. The forest held onto the dampness like a secret, with steam rising in patches where the sunlight fought through the branches. It was here, a few feet from a shallow ravine, that they found the spot. The one where the missing teenager had last been seen. Search and rescue had pulled his body out at dawn. 17 years old, dead from a fall, they said, slipped while hiking alone. A sad, tragic accident. That's what everyone believed. Except for Veer. The old German shepherd stood still beside James. Ears alert, eyes locked on something no one else noticed. His hackles bristled, and then, he barked. Not once, not a warning. He snapped into it, barking fast, deep, angry, the kind of bark trained into him long ago, one reserved for threats. Danger, and the unmistakable scent of something wrong. Whoa, Veer. James tried to calm him, tugging at the leash, but the dog planted himself firmly, barking at the base of a bush near the tree line. James narrowed his eyes. The rest of the small team, just a couple of local deputies and a forensics tech, looked over. "What's going on with him?" one asked. James didn't answer. Instead, he moved toward the bush, Veer pulling tight on the lead. And there, half buried under a clump of leaves and mud, was a backpack. Old, soaked, and coated in grime. The kind of item that could have been missed for days, even weeks. But Veer found it within minutes. James crouched, pulling on gloves. The pack was heavy. The zippers rusted. He unzipped the main compartment. There were a few standard items: a crushed granola bar, a cracked phone with a dead battery, and a pocket journal ruined by water. Then he checked the side pocket. And found it. A pen. Not remarkable at first glance. Cheap plastic. Chewed on at the cap. But carved into the barrel, faint but visible, were 5 scratched letters. Tyler. James felt his stomach clench. "Hey!" he called out, standing up, voice tight. "We got a name on the kid who just died." A deputy flipped through a clipboard. Ethan Ford. No aliases. Parents confirmed ID this morning. James held the pen up. Then who the hell is Tyler? The name meant something. He knew it did. It hit him before the others could react. Tyler Jensen, 10 years ago, went missing on a camping trip near these same woods. Never found. Case had gone cold. No suspects. No evidence. No body. And now, a pen with his name, just showed up at a fresh death scene. James's blood went cold. He looked at Veer, who had stopped barking but remained alert. Eyes locked on the tree line again. This wasn't just a coincidence. Back at the station, James pulled the cold case file from the archives. Dusty, untouched. Tyler had been 12 when he vanished. Smart, shy kid, last seen near the Southern Ridge Trail with his uncle. The story was that he wandered off while they were setting up camp. Search teams scoured the woods for 2 weeks. Found nothing. Not a shoe, not a scrap of clothing. James laid the pen on the desk beside the file. How did it get there? After all this time. In a backpack that supposedly belonged to Ethan. He went over the recovered bag again. No ID inside. Just common gear. Worn and unremarkable. Ethan's parents hadn't confirmed the bag as his. They said he'd left with a different one. So maybe it wasn't Ethan's at all. Maybe someone had planted it. But why, and more importantly, what connected Ethan to a boy who vanished a decade ago? James stared at the photos spread across the desk, Tyler's last school portrait. The map of where he was last seen. The sketch of his missing gear. And Veer, now lying near the heater. Eyes never fully closing, watched his new partner wrestle with the silence. That night, James couldn't sleep. The wind howled through the cracks in the window. Somewhere outside, a branch cracked. The town was too quiet again, like the air itself was holding its breath. He got up, made coffee. Veer stood immediately, as if they'd rehearsed this 1,000 times before. "You're not gonna let this go, are you?" James muttered, pouring the coffee into a thermos. "Yeah, me neither." They drove back to the site. This time, there were no other officers. Just the woods. And the dark. Veer led again, straight back to the spot. James scanned the area around the bush more thoroughly. Dug with his gloved hands. Under layers of soil and roots. He found something hard. Plastic. A tag. He wiped it clean. It was part of a lanyard. Faded red. The kind used for camp registrations or school trips. The print had mostly worn away. But just enough letters remained to make out. Woodpine Youth, Summer 2015. James stepped back. That was the year Tyler disappeared. He looked at Veer, who had now shifted a few feet away. Nose to the ground. The dog was moving in a tight pattern. Sniffing and pausing. Sniffing and pausing. Then stopped cold near the base of an old, fire-scarred tree. James joined him. And there, just visible beneath the bark, was a shape, carved deep and long ago. TJ+. It wasn't proof. Not yet. But someone else had been here with Tyler. Someone close enough to mark their names into a tree. And now, 10 years later, a teenager was dead in the same area. This wasn't coincidence. This was a trail, one that had gone cold but not dead. James stood slowly. Whatever had happened to Tyler hadn't stayed buried. And someone didn't want it to be found. The next morning, James brought the pen and the lanyard to Sheriff Holbrook. The older man listened, stone-faced, arms crossed, the corners of his mouth drawn tight. When James finished, Holbrook was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Tyler's case nearly tore this town apart. His uncle, Brent Rooker, was hounded for months. Never charged. But people talked. He left town 2 years later. Lives out near Echo Ridge now. Reclusive." James nodded. "He's my next stop." "Careful." Hallbrick said. That part of the ridge hasn't been patrolled in a long time. If he knows something, he's kept it buried a hell of a long time. I've got backup, James said, glancing down at Veer. Hallbrick didn't smile, just said, "That dog doesn't trust easy. You've earned something." James headed out. As they climbed toward Echo Ridge, the woods grew thicker, shadows stretched longer even under daylight. The path narrowed, the kind of place people forgot. The kind of place someone could disappear. Veer walked ahead, silent, but his ears twitched at every sound. They reached a shack, barely standing, hidden behind overgrowth. James knocked. No answer. He knocked again, louder. "Brent Rooker, police." Still silence. He moved to the side window, peeked in. Then he saw it. Dozens of notebooks, stacked high, pinned maps on the wall, and photos, blurry, faded, circles drawn in red ink. And on the table, another pen, identical to the one James had found. Same scratches, same letters. Tyler. James's heart pounded. Behind him, Veer growled. From the woods, footsteps. And a voice, low, tired. "You shouldn't be here." James turned. A man stood among the trees. Gray-bearded, hollow-eyed. Brent Rooker. His hands were empty, but his eyes, those were full of ghosts. James couldn't shake it. The more he pieced together, the more wrong it all felt. A decade-old disappearance, a new body found where it shouldn't be, evidence that didn't belong, and Veer, always alert, always leading him to what no one else could see. The backpack, the pen, the initials carved in the tree. It was all connected, somehow, but something kept tugging at the back of James's mind. A line in the cold case file. Tyler Jensen had gone to Woodpine Elementary before it was shut down in 2016. A budget cut, declining enrollment. The building had sat empty ever since. Boards on the windows. No trespassing, signs weathered to peeling paper. But Tyler's name had been mentioned in an old interview with a janitor. Always stayed late, the man had said. Didn't like to go home. Now James wondered if there was something more to that. So that night, under a pale, wind-tossed moon, he went back. He brought Veer, of course. The dog didn't hesitate. As soon as they stepped onto the cracked asphalt of the old schoolyard, Veer's ears went up. His stance changed. He wasn't just on alert. He remembered this place. They slipped through a back entrance. Pried open long ago. Inside, the school was a husk. Lockers rusted. Desks overturned. The air smelled of mold and dust, tinged with the sour sting of old chalk. James swept his flashlight in slow arcs as they moved through the halls. Paint peeled like curled skin. A gust of wind somewhere deeper in the building made the old doors creak and moan. Then they found the stairs to the basement. Veer stopped. His tail went stiff. His nose dropped to the floor. Then, without hesitation, he descended. James followed, flashlight trembling slightly in his hand. The basement was colder than it should have been. Not just because of the concrete and old pipes. It had the kind of cold that sank into the bones. That remembered things. The room at the bottom was wide. Shelves lined the walls, empty. Old janitorial carts leaned in the corners. A light fixture hung low, shattered and swaying. There were doors, some to storage closets, some locked, but Veer moved past them all, straight to the far wall. And then, he barked. Once, then again, loud, unrelenting. He pawed at the wall, growling. James walked over, raised his hand, and knocked. Hollow. The sound echoed. Unlike the others. Behind this wall, something empty. He ran his hands along the plaster. It was newer than the rest. Repainted. Uneven. A cover-up. James pulled his crowbar from the bag and jammed it into the seam. With a grunt, he tore the first chunk loose. Then another. Dust filled the air. And then, an opening. A hidden room, no wider than a small bedroom. He pulled his flashlight up. And froze. Bunk beds lined the left wall, 3 high. Rusting, but clearly used. A few small blankets still clung to them. Frayed but present. Along the right wall, toys. Piled into plastic bins. Blocks. A headless doll. A wooden puzzle with one piece missing. The center of the room was empty. But the walls. James's light settled on him, and his stomach turned. Handprints. Dozens of them, child-sized, pressed in paint or something darker. Some smeared, some outlined in red or brown. Above the beds, below the ceiling, along the seams. Tiny palms. Left behind. Silent screams etched into the wall. Veer stood frozen in the doorway. Hackles high. A low growl rumbling in his throat. James stepped in. Each footfall echoed too loud. He knelt by the bins. Picked up a small rubber dinosaur. The kind that came in dollar packs. Its head was chewed, like it had been clutched too tight by nervous hands. This wasn't just a hiding place. It was a prison. He found a small journal tucked behind one of the beds. Water damaged. Torn. The pages were childlike, scrawled in big uneven letters. One page had just a list of names. First names only. Tyler was there. So were 5 others. James flipped to the back. More handprints. A shaky drawing of the basement door. And below it, in red crayon, "He comes when it's dark." James's pulse spiked. He stepped back, heart pounding. Whatever happened here, it wasn't an accident. This was planned, built, hidden, a system someone had kept secret for years. A chill washed over him. Who had done this? Where were the other kids? Why did no one know? And why now was it all starting to surface again? He turned to leave, and heard it. A faint noise. Behind the far wall. A shuffling. James raised his flashlight and stepped closer. The wall had another panel. Not plaster. Wood. Warped. But not broken. He reached for the crowbar again. Veer stepped in front of him, growling now. Loud. Warning. James paused. Then the panel moved. From the other side. He yanked the crowbar up and drove it into the seam, forcing the door open, only to reveal a crawl space. Empty, but filled with air that smelled wrong. Rot, rust, fear, and a trail of small prints in the dust. Leading away. Something had been here. Recently. James backed out, breathing hard. This wasn't over. This was a door, and someone, or something, had walked through it. Back at the station, Holbrook listened without speaking. Then he stood, walked to the file cabinet, and pulled out a folder James hadn't seen before. He dropped it on the desk. Unsolved case, the sheriff said. 1992. Couple of kids went missing. Everyone thought it was a stranger abduction. But we searched that school top to bottom. Didn't find a damn thing. James opened the folder. Photos of 2 boys, 7 and 9. Missing posters. Witness statements. He flipped through the pages. One note stood out. Last seen playing behind the gym. Talked about a clubhouse in the walls. James looked up slowly. We missed it, Holbrook said. All of us. For 30 years. Or someone made sure you would. James said. Someone who used that room more than once. Holbrook looked tired. You think whoever did this is still out there? James nodded. They're not done, he said. They're just starting again. Veer let out a soft whine and curled up near the door. James watched him, trusted him more than anyone now. This town had secrets older than any report, older than any badge. But now they had a scent. And Veer never lost a trail once he caught it. Every lead pointed in one direction now. The secret room, the toys, the old student files, the vanished children, the patterns, and one name that kept surfacing in the quiet spaces of witness interviews and buried reports. Mr. Collins. He had been the night guard at Woodpine Elementary for nearly 2 decades. Worked the halls no one walked after dark. Watched over a school that, as it turned out, had something rotten growing beneath it. When the school closed, everyone assumed he left town. No forwarding address, no family, no trace. But James had learned something working homicide back in the city. Monsters didn't always disappear. Sometimes, they just changed clothes, waited, blended back in. And now, for the first time in 10 years, the town had an excuse to gather. A fundraising gala hosted at the community center, the old gymnasium newly refurbished and filled with polished tables and well-meaning smiles. James didn't want to be there. But Holbrook insisted. Public face, he'd said. Keep people calm. James came. Veer too. The dog had become a quiet constant at James's side. Even if no one dared get too close. Some still called him damaged. James knew better. He was the only one who saw. That night, the place was packed. Teachers, town council, donors, parents. A jazz trio played soft in the corner. Plates clinked. Voices hummed. James stood off to the side. One eye on the exits. The other on the crowd. Then the doors opened. And Mr. Collins walked in. He was older now, thinner, dressed sharp, with a blazer and bright tie. A cane in one hand. A glassy smile stretched across his face. The kind of man who knew how to shake hands and disappear into the background. He was talking to a former principal when Veer saw him. The dog stiffened, head up, eyes locked, and then he snapped, barking, loud, aggressive, furious. He lunged, leash straining, teeth bared. The room froze. Collins stepped back, Startled, mask cracking for a second. But only a second. What's wrong with that dog? He laughed nervously. Geez, he nearly bit me. But James wasn't watching Collins's smile. He was watching his eyes. Fear, not confusion, not concern, recognition. James stepped forward, pulling Veer back. The dog fought the leash. Growling, howling now. Everyone in the room stared. "I'm sorry," James said flatly, eyes locked on Collins. He's trained to recognize certain scents. Certain people. Collins's smile faltered. "Well, I'm no criminal," he said, "just an old man with arthritis." Veer growled again. James narrowed his gaze. "You used to work at Woodpine Elementary, right? Years ago, long before it closed. You had a locker there?" Collins paused. "Maybe. I don't really remember." "Why?" James didn't answer. He didn't need to. He already had the key. After the gala, James and Veer went straight to the school. The basement was no longer enough. He wanted everything. They forced open the staff room upstairs. Dust covered everything. Old papers. Forgotten chairs. But in the far corner stood a line of narrow lockers, each marked with a nameplate. Collins's was still there. James pried it open. Inside was nothing at first glance. A moldy coat. An old pair of boots. A cracked thermos. But on the inside of the locker door, just above where the coat had hung, was something carved. Faint, scratched deep into the metal. TYLER. James stared at it, heart pounding. Not scribbled, not accidental, etched, right where no one would see it. Unless they were inside the room. Unless they were in the locker. He stepped back, stomach turning. This wasn't a child's carving. This was a mark, a message, a name left behind. James imagined it, small hands. Locked inside, desperate to leave a trace. To be remembered. Veer whimpered low behind him. There was more. James checked the thermos. Inside was a folded piece of newspaper. Old, brittle, a missing poster. For Tyler. Folded carefully, preserved. Why would Collins have that? Unless he took it. Unless he kept it. Unless it meant something to him. James sat down hard on a rusted chair. It was him. It had to be. But he needed proof. Real proof. And right now, all he had was a name. A dog's reaction. And a gut full of rage. Back at the station, he laid it out for Holbrook. The sheriff didn't argue. He didn't say much at all. "Collins still lives here," James said, "right under your nose. We had no reason to suspect him." Holbrook muttered. "You do now." Holbrook looked down. "What do you want to do?" "I want a warrant." "You won't get one. Not with this town. Not with this judge." James clenched his jaw. "Then we do it quiet." Holbrook hesitated, then nodded. "You've got one night." Collins's house was tucked near the edge of the woods. A narrow two-story place with drawn curtains and a perfectly mowed lawn. James parked a block away and moved in on foot. Veer followed silently, every muscle coiled. They waited until the lights inside went out. Then they moved. The back door lock was old. It gave way quickly. The interior was pristine. Too pristine. Not lived in, maintained. Like someone keeping up appearances. James moved room to room. Nothing obvious, nothing overt, until they reached the basement. The door was locked. James picked it. The air inside hit him like a memory. Must, decay, damp carpet. He clicked on his flashlight. And the first thing he saw were the drawings. Hundreds of them, lined on the walls. Crude, childlike, stick figures in bunk beds. Black shapes in corners. Red circles. Names. Over and over. Tyler, Evan, MIA, Jaden, each with a slash through it. Except one. At the center of the wall. Julia, no slash. And beneath it, she's still here. James's blood went cold. He turned. Veer was already at a door on the far side. Pawing, barking once, sharp. James opened it. Inside, another room. Not quite a cell, but close. A mattress, a bucket, a plastic light overhead, and carved into the walls. Handprints. Fresh. They called it in. The entire force turned out. Forensics. Child services. News. Eventually, Julia Ramirez, 9 years old, reported missing 2 months ago in a town 40 miles north. They found her asleep in that room. Weak, hungry, but alive. She said she was taken from a playground. She said a man told her he was going to help. He had a badge. And a dog. Not like Veer. A different dog. Dead eyes. Obedient. James didn't want to imagine it. Collins was gone. He'd vanished before the first siren sounded. Left everything behind. At sunrise, James stood outside the ruined house. Veer sat beside him, panting gently, the air finally still. They hadn't found the man. But they'd found the room. The child. The truth. James knelt and scratched Veer's ears. "You knew," he whispered, "from the start." Veer leaned into him. For the first time, James saw the dog close his eyes. Not from fatigue. But peace. There were more questions now. How deep it went. Who helped? What else lay hidden in the shadows of this quiet mountain town? But for today, one thing was clear. The silence had been broken. And Veer, he was never just a retired dog. He was the one who remembered. They found Collins 2 days later. Holed up in a roadside motel outside the next county. He didn't run far. Maybe he never meant to. Maybe he thought the story would stay buried forever. That the town was too quiet. Too afraid to dig. Maybe he forgot that someone was still watching. But Veer didn't forget. And that was his mistake. When they brought Collins into the interrogation room, James was already there. No lawyers. No theatrics. Just the old man, tired and hunched, sitting under flickering fluorescent lights. James placed the photo of the hidden room on the table. The bunk beds. The toys. The handprints. "Tell me," James said. Collins stared at it for a long time. Then he exhaled, slow and rattling. "I didn't think anyone would remember," he said. James didn't blink. They didn't. He turned his head. But he did. Veer stood in the doorway. Silent. Still. Eyes locked on the man in the chair. Collins flinched. "He always watched me," the old man muttered. "Even back then. He knew. I saw it in his eyes." "Then why did you come back?" James asked. Collins laughed. Bitter. Low. I never left. I just changed jobs. Changed faces. You think people care enough to look closely in a town like this? They don't, as long as things stay quiet. But they didn't stay quiet. No. He looked at Veer again. Because of him. There was no dramatics. No excuses. No tears. Collins talked like a man who'd run out of lies to hide behind. He confessed to everything. The abductions. The manipulation. The way he preyed on the forgotten and the small. How he built the hidden room. How he locked them in. They trusted me, he said. That was the worst part. The keys. The uniform. They make people think you're safe. Makes the kids think you'll protect them. But sometimes the monster wears the badge too. James didn't speak. He didn't need to, because beside him stood the only one who had never been fooled. The trial was short. The evidence overwhelming. Collins pled guilty on all counts. Life without parole. No one asked for leniency. And when the news broke, when the secret was dragged out into daylight, the town was forced to face its own silence. How long had they ignored the signs? How many times had they chosen comfort over truth? But amid the shame and disbelief, one figure stood tall. Veer. He'd never spoken, never pointed a paw or written a report. But his bark, the sound that cut through silence, that forced the town to turn its head, had saved lives. The story spread fast. Local papers, national news, viral videos. The dog who remembered. Retired K9 solves cold case. Hero of Woodpine. People brought treats to the station. Children made drawings. One woman crocheted a vest that said "Protector" across the back. And Veer, he just watched. Quiet, calm, almost like he understood. At the town square, a ceremony was held. A plaque was unveiled near the park fountain. In honor of Veer, K9 officer, guardian, witness, hero. For the voices he heard when no one else was listening. James stood beside him as the mayor gave a speech. People clapped. Cameras flashed. But James couldn't stop thinking about the first time he saw Veer, silent under a broken porch. Eyes full of something deeper than suspicion. He hadn't just been waiting. He'd been watching. For years. Waiting for someone to see what he saw. After the crowd left, James and Veer walked through the quiet part of town. Past the old school, now cordoned off with tape and slated for demolition. Past the diner where the cook always left a strip of bacon on a paper plate behind the counter. They stopped at the edge of the woods. It was quiet again. But not the same quiet. This one didn't feel like something hiding. It felt like something had finally exhaled. James sat on a bench. Veer hopped up beside him. Tail still. You remember all of them, don't you? James said quietly. Veer didn't move. I don't think you ever forgot. That's what made you bark. That's what made you fight. The dog turned his head. Eyes meeting his partner's. You weren't just trained to protect. James said. You chose to. They sat there a long time. James thought about the missing posters. The unmarked graves. The journal pages written in crayon. The girl in the basement. Still alive because one dog wouldn't stop barking. He thought about how many people had given up. And how one German shepherd hadn't. At night, back at the station, Veer lay beside the desk. James was writing reports. But every few minutes, he looked down at the dog. Eventually, he put the pen down. "You know, you were more than a canine," he said. Veer's ears twitched. "You were a partner, a witness. Hell, maybe the only one who knew what this town was keeping in its bones." James leaned back. "That bark," he said. "That bark saved them, and I won't forget it." Veer didn't wag his tail. He didn't need to. He just closed his eyes. At peace. In the weeks that followed, the town changed. Slowly, uneasily. People spoke a little softer when they passed the station. Teachers paid closer attention to kids who stayed late. The school board pushed for new safety measures. Better background checks. Stronger community oversight. They planted trees in the park. 6 of them. One for every child Veer had led him to. The last was for Tyler. No body had been found. Just a name, a pen, a memory that refused to fade. James visited the tree every Sunday. Veer came with him. Every time, he'd sniff the bark, sit quietly, stare into the wind, as if still listening, still watching. On the anniversary of Julia's rescue, the town held another gathering. No speeches, no ribbon cutting, just silence. And one more plaque, a smaller one, placed under the 6th tree. For those who were lost. And for the one who never stopped looking. That night, as James locked the station and turned out the lights, he looked down at Veer curled by the door. "You coming?" he asked. Veer got up slowly. His joints were stiffer now. But his eyes still burned with that same alert fire. They stepped into the night together. The town no longer seemed haunted. It had scars now, but it also had memory. And as long as Veer was walking its streets, James knew, no secret would stay hidden for long. Because Veer didn't forget. Veer didn't forgive. And when he barked, the whole town listened.
Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please comment 1. And if you didn't, just hit like. See you in the next videos.